Welcome back. Despite warnings of incarceration or worse, Cuban dissidents on the island are once again planning to stage massive protests on November 15th, the same day COVID-related travel restrictions will be eased for visitors there. While some thought the protests of July 11th were a cry for more COVID vaccines, others recognized the calls for freedom among the demonstrators. I spoke with Elian Collazo, the executive director of the Cuban Freedom March, to discuss what's happened in the months since the initial uprising and what more can be done to help the Cuban people.
Elian, thank you so much for being with us here on Facing South Florida this Sunday morning. It's been almost, at this point, 4 months since the July 11th protest that took over the streets of Cuba. At the time, people thought this is it. This is the turning point, that moment of change. But has anything really changed in that time frame?
Well, first of all, thank you for having us and me today. For me, a lot has changed, actually. What has mainly changed is that the world now knows that in Cuba, undoubtedly, there is a repressive regime who, although over the last 62 years, they've been able to really mask what they say to be as a humane government that stands for equality of people, for equality of races, for all of these equality things. That is no longer the case. People have seen that anyone who has a difference of opinion in Cuba is going to go to jail, is going to be beaten, is going to disappear, and they do not have the right to liberty, which is what the Cuban people went out on July 11th to protest. And with that said, right, what we've seen is a grassroots movement inside of Cuba, led by Cubans, supported by the Cuban diaspora outside of Cuba, right? Who is now awake and fully understanding that they have a power. They said it in the streets of Cuba. We don't have fear anymore. No tenemos miedo. We don't have fear anymore. And those powerful words are exactly what is leading up now to this upcoming November 15th protest, which is this grassroots movement within Cuba that they've lost fear of this regime. It doesn't change that the regime is oppressive, though. The Cuban people are dealing with it every single day, and they've been dealing with it, quite frankly, for 62 years. And the Cuban diaspora has been telling the world that, right? But now it's not just the Cuban diaspora. Now is the Cuban people from within that could be heard thanks to the internet, right? That's the big part.
Tell me what it's like from what you've heard from people actually on the island right now. I've spoken to some people with family there who've said it's gotten worse in how they're being treated. They're glad that people around the world know about it now, but that it hasn't actually changed for the better for them yet. There was a recent article that said things have gotten worse on the island for the people there. How so?
So things have gotten worse in terms of every aspect of life. You have the pandemic. You have the government who is repressive and dictatorial at its core, right? And all of this is coming together at a time when the Cuban people are asking for freedom, for libertad. And this is a government that does not take well the idea of anything that challenges its authority to power. And what we've seen is a playbook, right? A playbook of dictatorial response to the freedom that the people of Cuba are calling for. And this repression has gotten worse. And the Cuban people's reaction to it, instead of being scared as they've been in the past, instead of shutting up as they've done in the past 62 years, what has their response been, and why I am hopeful that this is the moment of the Cuban people is they're not giving up. They're asking and telling the government, we're going to go back out to the streets. We're going to do it because it is our human right, and we want a change of system. We want a change of government. They're not going out there from January 11th till today asking for medicine or all of these things, all of which, by the way, are things that they need because the government controls all apparatuses of everything. So they control vaccinations, they control access to healthcare, education, everything. But what they're asking for in these protests is freedom, all-encompassing freedom, freedom of expression, individual freedom, economic freedom. Freedom means everything to the Cuban people.
For many on the outside, the protests of July 11th seem very spontaneous, but of course there were rumblings and there was action happening on the island that nobody knew about. But now we have this November 15th protest that people all over the world have already heard about. How do you think that's going to compare to what we saw back in July?
Well, there's two elements. One, there's a positive element that they saw that the activists in Cuba saw that they need the world to know ahead of time who are the people organizing this, so that the regime and its apparatus of repression, when they go and they try to jail these folks for doing what they're doing, at least the world knows, so that there is some type of accountability. That's the positive side, and that is why they're organizing it this way. The negative side is that it won't be spontaneous. That the Cuban government, unlike on July 11th, that was reactionary, the regime was reactionary to this shocking, like unbelievable thing they couldn't imagine. Now they're prepared. But the difference is here that the activists inside of Cuba, and this is why this is different, because since the Varela project in the 80s, when there was collection of signatures inside of Cuba by the thousands, right, under the constitutional system of Cuba at that time, there hasn't been any other civic project that wants to work under the system, under the constitution that is currently implemented. These activists have put the Cuban dictatorship against the wall. They're saying, we're taking you and we're letting you know months ahead, under the constitution that you guys are implementing, this is our right. What are you guys going to do about it? And the Cuban regime's response has been, we don't care about the law, not even about the laws that we pass. We don't care about it. We don't want any dissent, any differences of opinion. And that's why it's different this time, because for the first time in over 20 years, the regime is against the wall within its own, I would say, unlawful system of laws.
How can people hear support on November 15th if they so choose?
So the number one thing is taking onto Twitter, taking on to social media, and amplifying whatever is happening that day in Cuba, no matter how big or how small it is. It is a day of activism for the Cuban community and for the world. Okay, you do not have to be Cuban American. You do not have to be Cuban. You just have to be a human being who cares about the individual rights of self-determination of others, to stand by the Cuban people's call to action.
We'll be right back after this break.